Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. A birthday, when you get to my age, isn't really a celebration. It's a landmark, a quiet little stone on the side of the road that marks another year survived, another year since you said goodbye to the person who made all the other years make sense. For my 65th, my first since my wife Clara passed, I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a few calls from old friends, a quiet dinner by myself. The tradition Clara and I had was simple. At the end of the day, no matter what, we'd sit on the back porch. She'd have her glass of iced tea, and I'd have a bottle of the same cheap, no-name lager I've been drinking for 40 years. We'd watch the sun go down. That was it. It wasn't about the drink. It was about the ritual, the shared silence, the comfortable end to another day together. That's all I wanted, a quiet moment to honor a memory. My son, Daniel, lives in a different world now. He didn't just move out of the house, he ascended to a different plane of existence. He married Amelia, a wonderful girl in her own right, but she came from money. The kind of money I only read about, the kind that builds wings on hospitals and has last names on university buildings. Her father, Mr. Hayes, is a titan of finance, a man who moves markets with a phone call. Daniel, my son, the boy I taught how to change the oil in his first car, the boy who used to have grease under his fingernails from helping me in the workshop, is now a vice president at Mr. Hayes's firm. He wears suits that cost more than my mortgage payments and speaks a language of derivatives and acquisitions that I don't understand. I am proud of him, of course, but I miss my son. A week before my birthday, a courier delivered a long, heavy box. The packaging was immaculate, a thick, dark cardboard with a single, elegant logo embossed in gold. Inside, nestled in perfectly molded silk, was a bottle of whiskey. It wasn't just any whiskey. It was a 25-year-old single malt from a distillery I'd never heard of, the kind of place that probably only has a dozen barrels and a waiting list 5 years long. The bottle itself was a work of art, heavy, dark glass, with a label that looked like it had been handwritten by a monk. A small, leather-bound booklet was tied to the neck with a ribbon, detailing the whiskey's lineage and tasting notes. I went online and looked it up. My hands, calloused and scarred from a lifetime of working with wood, trembled a little as I typed in the name. The price that appeared on the screen made my stomach clench. $2,000. $2,000 for a bottle of brown liquid. It was the most absurd, obscene thing I had ever held in my hands. The gift did not feel like a gift. It felt like a press release, a declaration of his success, a symbol of the vast, unbridgeable gulf that now lay between us. There was a card, of course, a thick, cream-colored card, also embossed. The message was short, and it wasn't in his handwriting. It was a generic printed script. Happy 65th, Dad. Hope you enjoy this. A truly exceptional vintage for a truly exceptional man. All the best, Daniel and Amelia. It read like something a corporate gifting service would compose. There was no love in it, no memory, no connection. It was a transaction. He hadn't thought about me, about what I might actually want. He hadn't remembered the cheap lagers on the back porch, the comfortable silence, the simple ritual that had defined our family for decades. He had thought about what a man like his father-in-law would appreciate, what a man of his new station was supposed to give. He sent me a status symbol, a piece of his new world, an alien object that had no place in mine. I placed the bottle on my kitchen table, and it seemed to suck the warmth out of the room. It was a monument to how little my own son knew me anymore, or worse, how little he cared to know. For days, I just looked at it. I'd walk by and see my reflection distorted in the dark glass. I saw a man who had worked hard his whole life, who had provided for his family, who had raised a son and taught him, he thought, the value of honesty and hard work over the value of a dollar. And I saw that son drift away on a tide of wealth, becoming a stranger who thought a $2,000 bottle of whiskey could replace a 5-minute phone call. A profound sadness settled in my bones, heavier than any grief I had felt since Clara's funeral. This felt like a different kind of death, the death of a relationship, the quiet, unmourned passing of the bond I once cherished above all else. A week later, Daniel called. Not on my birthday, but the day after. He was busy, he said, a big deal closing. He asked if I'd received his gift. I told him I had. "Great stuff, right?" he said, his voice bright and distant. "Mr. Hayes says it's the best you can get. He was given a bottle by a client last Christmas." And there it was, the confirmation. The gift wasn't for me at all. It was a performance for an audience of one, his father-in-law. I was just a convenient excuse to purchase the prop. I held the phone, listening to my son talk about his deals and his deadlines, and a cold, quiet resolve began to form in my mind. He thought this bottle was important. He thought this gesture made him look good in the eyes of the man he so desperately wanted to impress. He wanted to show his father-in-law that he was the kind of son who takes care of his old man with extravagant gifts. Fine, I decided, in that moment, that I would help him complete the performance. Daniel and Amelia were throwing me a small, formal birthday dinner at their house that coming Saturday. The Hayeses would be there, of course. It was to be a celebration of me, but I knew it was really another opportunity for Daniel to showcase his perfect life, his perfect wife, and his perfectly managed grieving father. I looked at the bottle of whiskey on my table. It was a message, and I had finally decided to answer it. I would deliver his message to its intended recipient, in person, and I would watch my son's face when I did. I was done being a sad, forgotten old man. It was time to remind him who I was. In the days leading up to the dinner party, I lived a double life. On the phone with Daniel, I was the grateful, slightly overwhelmed father. I told him I was looking forward to trying the whiskey, that I was saving it for a special occasion. I let him believe his gesture had landed, that I was impressed and touched. I played the part he had cast for me, the simple man dazzled by the sudden generosity of his successful son. Each word of feigned gratitude felt like a small, bitter pill, but I swallowed them. My plan required patience, and it required him to be completely unsuspecting. The bottle of whiskey sat on my counter, its expensive silence a constant reminder of my purpose. I didn't move it. I didn't hide it away. I let it sit there, an unwelcome guest in my home, a symbol of the disconnect I was preparing to address. I spent my week in the workshop, the one place where the world still made sense to me. The smell of sawdust and varnish, the familiar weight of my tools in my hands, the honest satisfaction of turning a rough piece of maple into a smooth, finished piece of furniture. This was my reality. My hands knew this work. My heart knew this life. I thought about Daniel as a boy, standing in this very workshop. I could almost see him, a small kid with sawdust in his hair, trying to hammer a nail with a clumsy determination that was both frustrating and endearing. I had taught him how to measure twice and cut once, a lesson that was about more than just carpentry. It was about thoughtfulness, about preparation, about respecting the material you're working with. It was a lesson he seemed to have forgotten entirely. He had measured me once as a problem to be solved with money, and he had made his cut. He hadn't bothered to measure again to see if he was right. My life had been built on substance, on things that were real and tangible. The house Clara and I had bought, every repair made with my own hands. The meal she had cooked, simple and nourishing. The love we had shared, quiet and steadfast. Daniel's new world seemed to be built on the opposite. On image, on perception, on a dizzying pyramid of brands and status symbols where nothing was real but everything was for sale. The whiskey was a perfect ambassador from that world. It was all brand, no substance. Its value wasn't in the drinking, it was in the owning, in the giving, in the price tag. I realized my plan wasn't born of anger, not really. It was born of a profound, aching sadness. I couldn't force my son to come back to my world, but I could refuse to be a token citizen in his. I could send his ambassador home. On Saturday evening, I put on the one good suit I owned, the one I'd worn to Clara's funeral. It felt stiff and uncomfortable, a costume for a role I didn't want to play. I carefully placed the whiskey bottle in its opulent box into a simple, reusable grocery bag. The juxtaposition pleased me. It was like putting a crown jewel in a paper sack. I drove to their house, a modern glass and steel mansion in a gated community where all the lawns were unnaturally green. Pulling my 10-year-old pickup truck up to the valet felt like an act of defiance in itself. Walking into their home was like walking onto a magazine cover. It was beautiful, minimalist, and completely sterile. There were no family photos on the walls, no clutter of a life being lived, just expensive art and furniture arranged with geometric precision. Daniel and Amelia greeted me at the door, both looking perfect, their smiles bright and brittle. Amelia gave me an air kiss that smelled of expensive perfume. Daniel clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look warm but felt like he was checking for dust. "Dad, you made it. Glad you're here," he said, already scanning the room over my shoulder. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes were already there, holding champagne flutes, looking regal and composed. Mr. Hayes was exactly as I had pictured him, tall, silver-haired, with the easy, predatory confidence of a man who has never been told no. He shook my hand, his grip firm, his eyes assessing me in a brief, dismissive glance. The dinner was an exercise in quiet torture. The conversation was all about things I couldn't relate to. A recent charity gala, the stock market's performance, a planned trip to ski in the Alps. I was a foreigner at my own birthday party, an exotic specimen from another, simpler time. Daniel would occasionally try to include me, turning to me and saying something like, "Dad worked as a carpenter, you know, built half the furniture in our old house," a statement that was meant to sound affectionate but came across as a quaint anthropological observation. I just nodded and smiled, a ghost at the feast. They talked about wine pairings and Michelin-starred restaurants. I thought about the cheap lager and the comfortable silence of my back porch. I saw the way Daniel looked at his father-in-law, a desperate, hungry need for approval in his eyes. He wasn't my son in that room, he was a courtier, and Mr. Hayes was his king. My resolve, which had wavered for a moment in the face of their overwhelming world, hardened again into a solid, cold certainty. I was doing the right thing. The time for gifts came after the dessert, a tiny, architectural creation that tasted of nothing. Amelia brought out a beautifully wrapped present for me. It was a cashmere sweater, impossibly soft and ludicrously expensive. I thanked her, my voice sounding hollow even to me. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "And Dad, of course, I hope you've been enjoying the whiskey I sent." "About that, son," I said, my voice cutting through the polite chatter. The room went quiet. I reached down into the humble grocery bag I had placed by my chair. All eyes were on me. I pulled out the magnificent box, its golden logo seeming to glow in the soft light of the dining room. I didn't look at Daniel. I looked directly at Mr. Hayes. The performance was about to begin. I stood up, holding the heavy box in my hands. The silence in the room was absolute, a thick, expectant blanket. Daniel was beaming, a proud, foolish smile on his face. He thought I was about to make a speech, to thank him profusely, to validate his grand gesture in front of the one man whose opinion he truly valued. He was half right. I was about to make a speech. I turned my body slightly, addressing Mr. Hayes directly, making it clear that my son and everyone else in the room were now just the audience. "Daniel was so incredibly generous," I began, my voice steady and clear. "He sent me this for my birthday, a 25-year-old single malt. I looked it up. It's a remarkable thing." I paused, letting the weight of that statement hang in the air. I saw Mr. Hayes raise an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. He knew his whiskey. "My son," I continued, my voice taking on a softer, more reflective tone, "has done so well for himself. He lives in a world of exceptional things, a world of high standards and exquisite taste. He learned that from you, Mr. Hayes. You've been a tremendous influence on him." I saw Daniel preen out of the corner of my eye. He was soaking it in, completely oblivious. He thought this was the preamble to his coronation. "But I am a simple man," I said, and now I looked down at my own hands, the calluses and scars of a lifetime of labor. "My tastes are simple. My tradition, the one my late wife Clara and I shared for 40 years, was a cold beer on the back porch at sunset. That was our exceptional vintage. I looked back up at Mr. Hayes. His expression was unreadable, but he was listening intently. "So when I received this," I said, placing the box on the table and opening it, revealing the magnificent bottle inside, "I knew I had a problem. An object of this quality, this rarity, it deserves to be appreciated by someone who truly understands it. To open this for myself would be like using a Stradivarius to paddle a canoe. It would be a waste, a sacrilege." I let that sink in. I could feel Daniel's smile beginning to falter. A nervous energy started to radiate from him. He was no longer a proud host. He was a defendant waiting for a verdict he didn't understand. "A gift like this," I said, my voice firm and final, "is a statement. It's a symbol of success, of power, of a certain kind of life. A life of boardrooms and big deals. The kind of life you've built, Mr. Hayes. The kind of life you are teaching my son to build." And then I delivered the final, quiet blow. I slid the open box across the polished mahogany table until it stopped directly in front of Mr. Hayes. "So, I'd like to give this to you," I said simply. "It belongs here, in this world, not in mine. Please, accept it as a gesture of respect for everything you have, for everything you are." The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence filled with the shrapnel of my son's ambition, his desperate need for approval, his complete and utter miscalculation. I had taken his grand gesture, his $2,000 statement of success, and I had publicly declared it meaningless to me. I had re-gifted his performance to his audience. Mr. Hayes looked at the bottle, then he looked at me. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He understood. He might not have understood the family dynamics, the years of silent disconnection, but he understood power. He understood symbolism. He saw my move for what it was, a quiet, dignified act of defiance. He saw a man who could not be bought or impressed. "Thank you, Arthur," he said, his voice resonating with newfound respect. He picked up the bottle, admiring it. "You are a man of rare character, and you are right. This is an exceptional whiskey. I accept your very gracious gift." He had no idea he was a pawn in my little family drama, but he played his part to perfection. I finally turned to look at my son. The color had drained from Daniel's face. The proud, confident smile was gone, replaced by a mask of horrified disbelief. He looked utterly humiliated, his eyes wide with a mixture of anger and a dawning, terrible comprehension. I had not raised my voice. I had not accused him of anything. I had simply held up a mirror to his actions, and the reflection had shattered him. In his world of symbols, I had just used his own chosen symbol to publicly reject everything he had become. I had taken his money, his status, his desperate attempt to impress, and I had told him, in front of his king, that it had no value in the kingdom where I was still a father. Amelia was looking back and forth between Daniel and me, confused and embarrassed. Mrs. Hayes was studying her napkin with intense interest. The party was over. The perfect evening, the perfect family. It had all been fractured by a quiet old man and a bottle of whiskey. I gave a slight nod to Mr. Hayes. "Happy birthday to me," I said softly to no one in particular. Then I turned, walked out of their beautiful, sterile house, got into my old pickup truck, and drove home. I didn't need the valet. I knew my own way out. The drive home was the quietest 65 years of my life. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the absence of weight. The heavy, unspoken resentment I had been carrying for years, the grief for a son I felt I had lost, it had all been placed on that polished mahogany table next to a bottle of whiskey. I had left it there for them to clean up. I was free of it. When I got home, the house didn't feel as empty as it usually did. It felt like mine again. The alien presence on the kitchen counter was gone. I walked out to the back porch, the screen door groaning a familiar welcome. The sun had already set, but a faint purple and orange glow still lingered on the horizon. I opened the old, half-rusty refrigerator I keep out there for drinks, and I pulled out a bottle of the cheap lager Clara and I always drank. The pop of the cap was a satisfying, unpretentious sound. I sat in my usual chair, the wicker groaning under my weight. I took a long, slow drink. It tasted of nothing and everything. It tasted of 40 years of shared sunsets, of comfortable silences, of a life built on things that had no price tag. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, started ringing. I knew who it was. I let it ring. It rang 5 times, then stopped. A minute later, it started again. I sat on the porch, sipping my beer, watching the last of the light fade from the sky. Let him wait. Let him stew in the wreckage of his perfectly curated evening. When it rang for the 3rd time, I finally went inside and answered it, but I did not speak. What was that? Daniel's voice was a choked whisper, a mixture of fury and shame. What in the hell was that, Dad? I was silent for a moment, letting his question hang in the air. That, I finally said, my voice calm and devoid of anger, was me giving your gift to the person you bought it for. You embarrassed me, he hissed. In front of my wife, in front of her family, you made me look like a fool. No, son, I said, and the word son felt heavy and strange on my tongue. You made yourself look like a fool. You bought a $2,000 bottle of whiskey for a man who drinks $2 beer. Did you do that for me, Daniel, or did you do that for him? Be honest. The line went silent. I could hear him breathing, the sound ragged. He had no answer, because we both knew the truth. The whiskey had never been about me. It was a tribute, an offering to the new God in his life, his father-in-law. I had simply rerouted the delivery. You don't get it, he finally mumbled, his anger deflating into a pathetic, wounded tone. I'm trying to provide for my family, to build something. I know what you're trying to build, I said, and my own voice was now thick with a sorrow that surprised me. I was there when you were laying the foundation. I taught you how to do it. You build things with your hands, with honesty, with respect for the materials. You don't build a life out of price tags and brand names, Daniel. You don't build a family on performances. All that stuff, the house, the cars, the whiskey, it's not a life. It's a stage set. And tonight, I refuse to play my part. I could hear Amelia in the background, her voice a worried murmur. He said something to her, his hand likely cupped over the receiver. I don't know what you want from me, he said, his voice returning, sounding young and lost. I wanted my son, I said, and the simple truth of the statement hung between us, stark and painful. I wanted a phone call. I wanted you to remember your mother's favorite flower. I wanted you to sit on the back porch with your old man and have a cheap beer and not talk about the market. I wanted a gift that said you knew me, not one that said you could afford me. There was nothing left to say after that. The chasm between us was too wide, filled with too many unspoken things. We said a clumsy, cold goodbye, and I hung up the phone. I stood in the quiet of my kitchen, the silence a comfortable old friend. My revenge, if you could call it that, was complete, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a funeral. I had mourned my wife, and now I was mourning my son. But it was a necessary mourning. I had finally accepted the truth. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man I didn't know and didn't particularly want to. My act at the dinner party wasn't an attack. It was a boundary. It was me, a simple carpenter, telling my son and his new king that my soul was not for sale and that their currency was not valid here. I walked back out to the porch and finished my beer, looking up at the first stars beginning to appear in the night sky. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't lonely. I had my memories, I had my workshop, I had my self-respect. And that was an inheritance more valuable than any bottle of whiskey could ever be. If you're still with me, I want to know, What was the moment that made you realize someone wasn't who you thought they were? Share your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, where the most unforgettable true stories find their voice.